In this video, we're going to look at watch systems, why you have a watch system, what you should think about when you're setting it up, and what can go wrong if you don't have one in place.
Good afternoon, how can I help you?
Now, I've made some notes because this is quite an extensive subject, so that I don't miss anything. I've made some notes here. So the first thing is to recognise that many people that sail will never need to go into a watch system. They'll never have to have a watch system. They just day sail. They'll enjoy themselves in local waters or just hopping down the coast. So if you don't need a watch system, fine. If you're doing anything over maybe 12 or 18 hours, then you're probably going to need to have some sort of downtime for some of your crew and for yourself so that you are well rested, you're not too cold, you're not overexposed to the sun, and that you get a little bit of downtime just to rest your eyes, if nothing else, and to get out of the wind. And then the next thing is anything over 18 hours, probably, in my experience, you would need to be thinking about a formal watch system. Some people will have an informal system, so they will just maybe have 3 people on board, and at any one time one of them can go below and take a couple of hours sleep. And that will work for certain vessels and certain crew. Normally the more experienced crew who aren't worried about asking to have some downtime will work that quite well, and they understand their responsibilities and they understand how they feel and when they're tired. And they know that if you get tired, you can make mistakes. So they will take it on themselves to say, look, I'm feeling a bit tired now, or we know the weather's going to get bad this afternoon. Can I get a couple of hours kip now? And a good skipper would be thinking about that anyway. But if you're doing anything longer than that, you're going to need something that's a bit more structured. And the reason I like structure on these things is because, and again, the more experienced the sailor, generally the more anal they are, really. So especially if they're skipper, because they understand that the buck stops with them. So setting in place systems makes life a lot simpler. It means there's less to be thinking about. Everything is in place. Everyone knows what's expected of them. And then you've only got to deal with things that slip through the gaps rather than it's on autopilot effectively, rather than having to think about things as they happen. So longer voyages, coastal passages, you are going to need some sort of watch system, almost certainly. Benefits are pretty obvious, aren't they? First of all, it allows you to safely and efficiently manage the vessel. And by that I mean everything, the engine checks get done regularly, people get fed on time, the boat is kept clean and hygienic, or as clean as you can keep it in bad weather. Everything is available so that the crew that are supposed to be sailing are sailing, and that they are not too tired to be able to sail safely and without making silly errors. Because when you're tired, your ability to make... I mean, I have been so tired and seen other people so tired on a voyage that they're almost talking zombies. And that, of course, is no... great thing if you're the skipper. I mean, the last thing you want is a skipper that is that tired that they're making poor decisions. Okay, now there are requirements from a manning and rest requirement perspective for commercial crew and skippers, so that you must have a certain amount of rest and you have to record that rest. But in the leisure industry, leisure sailors, the same requirements are not necessarily in place, but allowing crew downtime is important, both because if you're on a 3-week voyage, they're going to go a bit nuts if they get no time to themselves to just turn off. If you're racing, for example, you need to have 100% focus when you're sailing on deck. So it needs to be 100% focus. You can't maintain 100% focus 24/7. You need to have some time to rest. You need to have some time to chill out. Maybe throw some AirPods in your ears and just chill out from the boat for a couple of hours. So it's important that you allow for that in your crewing and your crew management. A strict timetable. Now, if you set up a timetable for your watch system, then what's going to happen is everything becomes predictable. and it's equal, and nobody is going to get resentful. Or no reasonable person is going to get resentful. And believe me, when people get tired, they get very unreasonable sometimes. Everybody is different. So it's worth trying to manage that through a good, fair, clear watch system. The other thing is that we're all human and we all have quirks. And just some people just cannot get on easily together. Now, we're all adults too, or most of us, and so therefore it should be expected that we are going to be able to get on with each other for a short period of time. But there's no reason to make life difficult either. So if you know that you're likely to have two, what I might call strong characters on the same watch, if they don't share all the same worldviews and beliefs, you might well find that they're going to butt heads very early on, and that's going to have a detrimental effect on the morale of the rest of that watch and eventually on the entire crew. So think about that when you're putting your watches together. Now, it can't be the overriding thing. It has to be probably the last thing that you think about, because people just have to get on or get off the boat. Okay? But sometimes it's worth just thinking long and hard about, are these two people going to be the best people to have on the same watch? Now, that should come after you've done other things, and that means splitting skill sets. So if you've got two people that are good with engines and mechanics generally, you don't want them both on the same watch, because if something happens that requires them to be looking, for instance, at the water maker, well, that's no good. If they're both on the same watch, they're going to be up when they should be asleep, or when they should be sailing, they're going to be working on the water maker. So try and split them so that you've got one on each watch. Okay. The same with, for instance, sail making. If you've got somebody who knows how to fix a sail, if you've got two of them, then split them. It might mean that if there's a big problem with a sail, you need them both to be working on the sail, or at least leading work on the sail with other crew. So again, have those two skills. You've got somebody who's a foreman who can overview the problems. Okay. And then we're going to look at why we need to have watch systems. Well, the first thing is that we are required by law to maintain a good and effective watch. So that means you've got to be physically looking out for other vessels and for hazards, maintaining your own vessel, course, etc. And also you've got to be using all means necessary. So what's available to you? Radar. Well, if you've got radar, you should be using it if you've got poor visibility or it's at night. But you need to have a crew that understands how to use it. There's no point having radar if you don't know how to use it. So you need one person on each watch who understands how to use radar. Otherwise, you're going to be up all night, which is not going to be good. Also, AIS. So do you have one watch leader on each watch who understands how to use AIS? Also, IRPCS. So International Regulations for the Prevention of Collisions at Sea, otherwise known as coal regs or rules of the road. So do you have one person on each watch as a minimum who knows the coal regs? Now this is important, especially in coastal passages where there's a lot of shipping around. But you need to know your voyage and you need to know your coal regs, because you'll get yourself into a lot of trouble if you don't know what is a hazard and what is not. So it's important that you have enough skills on each watch. Okay. Number of people on deck. Well, generally I, as a minimum, like to have two people on deck, or two people on watch at least, with a small vessel. Larger vessels, you might want more people, 3 or 4 people as a minimum on deck. Depends on what needs to be done. Can you tack the vessel safely with 2 people on deck? If you can, well, that might be enough. And you might have one other person on that watch down below resting, or out of the cold weather or whatever. But a lot of deliveries will only have maybe 3 people on the delivery anyway, the skipper and 2 crew. That's a skeleton crew, and you have to be aware that the skills are it's going to be harder for the skipper, to sail a boat in that configuration. Okay, so he should be planning what he requires for the boat, for the weather, and for the passage concerned. Okay, you can imagine things can go south very fast when you're sailing with just one person on deck. That person goes overboard and the autohelm's on, they're lost. If that person goes overboard and they're clipped on and the autohelm's on, they're probably drowned. So having two people around is really a very good idea and is safe crew management. If you can't run the vessel like that for whatever reason, you need to set standing orders that mean that the person on deck has to remain clipped on and cannot leave the cockpit without waking somebody else and making sure that they're able to observe what they're doing. Now, the downside to this is that it's human nature that no one wants to wake somebody who's sleeping just to go 4 or 5 feet out of the cockpit to grab a sail tie or something like that. And that's when accidents happen. So you have to think about these things, and you need to set them, I would suggest, in some written standing orders. And the skipper would set those standing orders to govern things like that, to govern when the skipper needs to be woken. If the wind changes by 1 Beaufort scale, for example, or if the wind shifts by more than 10 degrees for 5 minutes, or is there a vessel within 5 nautical miles of the vessel that you're on, or is the vessel on a closer CPA, closest point of approach, on AIS, of closer than 1 nautical mile. These sort of things. You set your own parameters. So it's important that everybody on board, but certainly your watch leaders, are aware of when they need to wake you, what's acceptable, when you clip on, which is either all the time when you want to, or as a minimum at night, obviously, or when I normally set it so that if you're reefed, then obviously it must be windy enough to be reefed, and therefore you clip on. So clipped on then, clipped on at night, clipped on in fog, that sort of thing. Right, so the next thing is duplication and redundancy. So if you set out with your crew saying, yep, that's the minimum I need to sail, and then one of your crew comes down with seasickness, or half of your crew come down with seasickness, which is not going to be unusual, have you got a problem? If you have, you need to be taking more crew with you. Okay. Same with injury. Somebody might hurt themselves or just feel unwell or get a sickness bug and they just can't stand watch, in which case, are you going to be okay? Crew selection. So this is going to boil down to, I've got 10 things listed here in no particular order, so I'll read them out to you. But again, pretty obvious, but it's worth thinking about. So first thing is age and health. So do any of your crew have any chronic illnesses? Are they on medication? Do you have the medication? What would happen if they were taken ill? So that's important, especially when you're on an ocean passage because you're on your own. What age and what mobility do they have? Have you got enough people to do the heavy lifting, literally the heavy lifting, if you need to? You know, if you've got to change a sail or you've got to go up the rig, can somebody do that at sea? If you've got no one on board that can go up the rig to do something important at sea, you might have a problem. And if the only person is you and you're the skipper, well, you've got a real problem, because you really shouldn't be the only person up the rig. The most experienced person on the boat should not be the person up the rig. Personality type and character. Well, yeah, that's going to depend on if you're doing a delivery. Then I've been on some deliveries that have been truly miserable, and I've been on some deliveries where I'm still in contact with people now. So you have to kind of grunt up sometimes with that side of things. If you're on a family boat and you own the boat, then of course you decide who you take sailing. But once you need to be thinking, well, I like both these people, but will they get on? So if they won't get on, do you want them both on the same boat at the same time? If you decide yes, are they on the same watch? Now, if they share the same skill sets, great, you can split them, put them on different watches. But if they both are not susceptible to seasickness, for example, you'd want them split. But if one of them is susceptible to seasickness and one of them isn't, you'd probably put them on the same watch, so that if one goes down, you've still got one person left. Nationality, language, etc. So, well, languages is obvious. You need to be able to all communicate in whatever language you decide. Nationality is important because, of course, sometimes you're going to have issues with going into different countries. You might have visa issues. So has everybody got the right visas? You're responsible as skipper to make sure that these things are dealt with. So you need to check this. On that subject, by the way, if I'm going on passage with people and they've got passports, I will take their passports off them when they join the vessel, and I will put them in a grab bag ready to go to the life raft if necessary, and I'll put them somewhere safe. And they get their passports back when we get through customs. You don't want to be in a situation where someone absconds when you're at anchor waiting for customs the next day. Okay. Fitness. So down to age, really, mobility again. You need to have people that are fit enough to go on the voyage. Susceptibility to seasickness. Now, this is a big one. If all of your crew get seasick and you have bad weather, you've got no crew. Okay. Or some people function with seasickness, some people don't. But everybody loses efficiency. And it can be dangerous to have people on deck in bad weather that are seasick because they lose an element of self-awareness, of balance, of strength. They'll lose a lot of strength. So having them on the foredeck in bad weather is a very bad idea. You're more likely to have an accident or lose somebody overboard. Transferable skills. So if you have somebody who's particularly good at engine maintenance and things like that, great. If you've got two, one on each watch, then you've got engineers on both watches. If you've got somebody who's good with electronic systems, fantastic. I'm not particularly strong on electronics, so if you've got somebody there that is strong, I sailed with an aircraft engineer, and working on a 24-volt boat system was simplicity itself for them when they're dealing with aircraft. So that was fantastic and a great skill to have. It might not just be that, though. It might be other skills. I mean, sometimes with a big crew, if you happen to have a big crew, man management and people skills are really important. Your strongest sailors might not be the people that you put in charge of a watch. It might be the person that everybody respects and who knows how to deal with all types of different personality traits. Okay. Dietary preferences and health situations again. So if you've got somebody who suffers from Crohn's disease, for example, or is a celiac, then you need to be very, very careful on how you plan your victualling, your food management. Okay, so in that sort of scenario, you need to think of that well ahead of time. You need, if you're going to take them and they are and they understand the scenario, I would tend to put them in charge of victualling the vessel, because then they've done the victualling, and as long as everybody else can eat what they have chosen, and that's another thing. If you've got a vegetarian, does the whole boat go vegetarian? In my experience, that's not very popular, but it depends on the crew. Okay, but if you've got a vegetarian or a vegan, which is even more difficult to manage, then you might have 9 crew who eat anything and 1 crew who is vegan. Well, you've only got limited cooking facilities and you've only got limited storage facilities. So how do you deal with that? It can be done, but you have to deal with it care. So what I would tend to do is, again, I would ask the vegan for their input, what they can and can't eat, what they're prepared to eat. Will they make sacrifices on what they can and can't eat for the period of the voyage? And then work around that. Get them involved with the planning and also with the victualling and the shopping and the food storage, so that he knows or she knows exactly where that food is kept, and that everybody knows how it's prepared. And the same, and obviously very important, with allergies. So if you've got someone with allergies, you need to know. So that should be a question you ask of your crew when you're selecting them. They need to obviously take responsibility for themselves, but you need to notify your entire crew what the allergies are, and you need to plan your food preparation. If you've got somebody who has a very severe nut allergy where they go into anaphylactic shock if they get anywhere near nuts, then if you have nuts on board and they are on a surface, you could end up with somebody in a life-threatening situation. So you need to be aware of that. You need to plan around it. I wouldn't take nuts on board, and anything with nuts in it. Now that, again, difficult to plan for. So again, get that person to check the victuals as they come on board, and anything that might have nuts present, perhaps you either throw it out or you put it in a special location and mark that location, and then inform the entire crew. You cannot just open this cereal and splash it out on the counter and spill some on the counter, and then somebody prepares lunch and we've got somebody in anaphylactic shock. Okay, if they are suffering, if they can suffer from anaphylactic shock from that, or a bee sting or something like that, then you need to make sure that they have their EpiPen with them. And if they don't have an EpiPen and they are susceptible to anaphylactic shock, I would not take them to sea. Okay, simple as that, because you may well end up bringing them back or not bringing them back. Okay. Sailing and navigational skills. So sailing and navigational skills, obviously they need to be able to sail, but not everybody needs to be a great sailor. They need to know which bits of string to pull. They need to know the basics of safety. You don't really want them to be susceptible to seasickness if at all possible. You need to know that they can recover from seasickness, hopefully. And they need to have done enough sailing so that if you take them on a 3-week voyage across the ocean, they aren't going to literally lose it 3 days in, and then you've got a real problem. Okay, some people just do not like being out in an open ocean. It's few and far between, but some people just do not like it. It has a real problem, and they don't necessarily know until they're out there. So you want someone who's done some sailing, gone off away from land, and then you need to make sure that they understand somebody on each watch understands coal regs, that people know how to change sails, how to tack, how to jibe. I would also want to do, and this goes, I'll deal with this in another video, but you need to go and look at things like emergency situations, helicopter evacuation to a life raft, man overboard, flooding, fire. Do your crew know what to do in those scenarios? Okay, so depending on the voyage you're going to undertake, if it's going to be a 24-hour voyage down the coast to Weymouth, you need to brief your crew, but you need to select how you brief your crew, okay, and how you select them. If you're going to go from South America to Cape Town, you need your crew to be pretty well trained, okay. Yeah, the other thing is, in terms of, and this really boils into what I've just been saying, bedding in. So it's a good idea with your crew to get them to meet beforehand and in a social situation. In an ideal world, you want time, especially on a voyage, it's better to spend the time alongside where everything is stable, going through the boat, showing them where all the seacocks are, showing them where all the food is. Hopefully get your crew to pack the food away, because then everybody knows. If you only have 1 or 2 people packing away food, those 1 or 2 people will be woken every mealtime when whoever is doing the food is looking for the olive oil, for example. So it's a really good idea to either have a schedule of where everything is kept, which obviously is a lot of work, or alternatively, everybody has packed everything away and then label a few of the locations so everyone knows roughly where to look. Otherwise, you are going to end up with people being woken all the time, and that gets really infuriating when you're tired. Okay. Next thing is, it's good if everyone's worked on the vessel a bit. So if they've all done a little bit of preparation, they've had time to talk to each other, everybody gets an indication of what people are like, everyone knows they're contributing, it builds a sort of team flavour. Everyone can enjoy the excitement of getting ready for the voyage, and then maybe go out for a beer and some food. And again, that just helps instill sort of camaraderie, and if you all go out and get completely spannered and then have a big row, that's obviously not a good idea. But if you can socialise and find what you like in other people and how they are in normal life, that helps. Right, so then crew jobs. Well, touched on this already, but in an ideal world, you want somebody on each watch that can be an engineer, somebody on each watch who can be the bosun, somebody on each watch who is a able to understand coal regs and how to maintain an efficient watch. The larger the vessel, the more skills you probably require to split. Okay, on smaller vessels, you might end up with the skipper being the only person that knows all of these things, but then you need to manage your crew accordingly, and you need to set different standing orders so that crew know when to wake you, and that's going to mean that your life might be tougher. The other thing is, and I think this is important with crew jobs, you should, the way I set it is that one person on each watch is responsible for cooking and food preparation. One person on each watch is responsible for cleaning, and those two people should be different. If you have a cook who is also a cleaner, then you're going to have to really carefully manage what jobs they do and when. You don't want somebody cleaning the heads, the toilets, and then coming into the galley and preparing food. Now, obviously, you would expect that they would wash their hands, but even so, you are potentially introducing a hygiene problem. So it's important I would split those jobs whenever possible. So if necessary, if you've got a cleaner who is, maybe have them as engineer as well, so they do the daily engine checks and have them clean at the same time. But keep the cook separate. Also keep the cleaner out of the galley. So the cleaner cleans everything but the galley area. Okay. Everything that you keep in the heads should stay in the heads. Anything that you use to clean the heads, and then once you've used it and you've finished with it, you can throw it away, or you can wash it somewhere else and replace it in the heads again. But never bring it to the galley, otherwise you're going to have a very sick, poorly crew very quickly. Okay. But consider color coding things like buckets or cloths, so that maybe red buckets and red cloths are used in the galley only and are kept in the galley only, and another color, blue or whatever, or yellow or white, is kept in the heads, and blue or white is kept in the galley. Okay, but a color coding system. All right, especially on a bigger vessel where there's lots of crew and not everybody has got the memo. That's a really good idea, and it just makes things simple. Okay, smaller vessels, less of a problem, obviously. In terms of cleaning and when to clean, well, that's down to the crew, but I would say you want to clean the heads at least twice a day, and then wipe down surfaces as well once or twice a day. Probably do it twice a day again. I would wipe down the surfaces first and clean the heads last, so that you're not wiping potentially stuff from the heads all over the rest of the boat. And make sure the heads are properly cleaned. Okay. Now, it can be, when it's bad weather, it can be really, really unpleasant having to go down and clean the heads, especially if someone hasn't closed a seacock or something and water has come in and you're paddling around in a load of contaminated water. Not pleasant, and if you suffer from seasickness, obviously not great for that. But if you can keep the heads clean even in bad weather, the boat is a far, far more pleasant place to be. It reduces smells. It means everybody has a reasonably civilized environment in which to live. It's hygienic. People won't get ill, or less likelihood of people getting ill. The whole thing is just better. If you are seasick, try and be seasick in a bucket and pass it to deck, or over the side if you're on deck, but try not to be seasick in the heads. If you are seasick in the heads, then it's your responsibility wherever you're seasick to make sure that you properly dispose of it and clean it up. No excuses for not cleaning up. Okay, so you've got to, because otherwise the rest of your crew are living in that smell, that odour, and it's not pleasant. Okay. Right, so let's get into watch systems. Most watch systems are going to be based around meal times. It just makes sense because you don't want to prepare meals twice. You don't want to have one watch eating at 12 o'clock and one watch eating at 2 o'clock. You want them to be having lunch at the same time, evening meal at the same time, breakfast at the same time. And therefore watch changes should generally rotate around meal times. Through the night, your watches, obviously you're not going to have any meals, so people can just snack and have coffee and tea and stuff. And generally I would leave that to each watch to organise themselves. You might have a snack bag for each watch on a longer voyage, and those snack bags, make sure they're equal, make sure they're separate and that people know where they are. Have somebody in charge of the snack bag, perhaps. because otherwise it has been known for snack bags to be raided, and that causes an enormous resentment. So it may sound stupid, but it does happen. I know watch leaders who have fallen out over the last Mars bar and not spoken to each other for weeks. So around meal times. So what else are we going to think about? Well, the watch system should be based on local time or boat time. So depending on where you are in the world, you're going to have a local time, obviously, and then you're going to have universal time, aren't you? Greenwich Mean Time, Zulu time. Okay, so I would generally navigate and run my log based on universal time or UTC, UT. And then next to it, I would have local time. So I would have my time, Greenwich Mean Time or UT. Then I'd have local time next to it. And the reason for that would be that when I'm navigating, I use universal time because most things are going to be in universal time. And if they're not, it'll be universal time +3 or -3 or whatever. Okay. So I use universal time when I'm navigating. But I use local time when I'm running the boat. And local time will be based on how far east or west you are as to when the sun comes up and therefore when noon is, etc. And that will change if you're going east or west. So if you're going east, every 15 degrees east, you're going to have to change the clock. Okay. Now you might not do it every 15 degrees. You might wait until you've done 30 degrees and then make one big change. But if you need to make those changes. If you don't, you're going to end up eventually, if you're going around the world, having breakfast at 9 o'clock at night, which nobody's going to enjoy. Well, thank you for. So every now and again, you're going to need to change local time. Run the watches based on local time. That would be my advice. And then all you've got to do is every time you decide to do a time change, notify everybody the watch before. At lunchtime, for example, we are going to change to +1 hour. Okay. And make sure that if you're going to do that more than once on a voyage, make sure that the next time you change time, the other watch benefits from the extra hour in bed. Because otherwise you're, again, going to have resentment. If one watch gets the benefit of an extra hour in bed or one less hour on deck, and the next time you change, the same thing happens again. People will notice, especially when they're tired. So make sure to split it so that each watch gets that benefit. Okay? And that means that everybody still gets to change watch around meal times, which is what we're trying to achieve. Okay. So what sort of watch systems have we got? Well, the first option is straightforward, simple, and most people, even non-sailors, will be aware of it, and that's 4 hours on, 4 hours off. So what does that mean? Well, pretty obvious. You are on watch and responsible for your duties on watch for 4 hours. And then you go off watch, and you, in most scenarios, time would be your own. Some skippers might run it so that when you're off watch, you do your duties. I don't. There's plenty of time normally when you're sailing to go and do an engine check and just leave somebody on deck. But make sure if it's 4 hours on, 4 hours off, that when the watch change comes, everybody needs to be on deck at least 10 minutes before watch change. And they need to be kitted, ready to go. There's no point coming on deck and then going, oh, it's a bit chilly. Go back down again, changing. That is infuriating. It's one of my pet hates. So stick your head up when you're about to do a watch change, 30 minutes before, 20 minutes before, and say, what's it like up here, guys? And somebody will tell you, it's parky, bloody cold. Okay, what are you wearing? Oh, I've got both fleeces on. Right, okay, fine. All right. And then dress accordingly. Make sure you've got all your kit. You've got your knife if you're taking a knife. You've got your head torch, whatever it is that you required. Your sun hat. Your sun cream is on if it's in tropics, whatever. And then go on deck and be on deck 10 minutes before you are due to change over. And when everyone's on deck, I would expect that the watch leader is responsible for getting everybody on deck on time. And then once you're on deck, you need to go to, if one person is going to take the helm, for example, that person should go to the helm and start getting a bit of a brief from the helm. Yeah, okay, well, it's quite a tricky sea. We've got some cross waves coming in. It's you have to watch for the slam. It depends what sort of sailor you are. Are you racing? Are you, whatever? How experienced is everybody? We've had a few squalls. You can see there's a big squall cloud over there. I think it's going to go ahead of us, but I'm keeping an eye on it. That sort of stuff. Okay. And then let the helm get bedded in, get their night sight, night vision, and get the feel for the boat. If it's challenging conditions, it might take a little while for that helm to get used to not rounding up or slamming the boat. So the other helm can be there going, just keep an eye on things, okay? The rest of the crew need to be doing a handover. So they'll be looking at, for example, you might have, if you're flying a spinnaker, you might have somebody who is sitting next to a winch with the vang or the kicker on a winch. And the idea is that if you round up or you broach, you can dump that line off the winch, lift the boom, depower the mainsail. And that will enable you to recover from a broach. But if you don't have that in place, you could end up pinned down sideways until such time as you do. And it's much harder to do that when you're on your side. And it can be dangerous to be on your side. If you're right over on your side, laid down, some vessels will start taking on water, and that's not good at all, or if you're in a big sea state. And you're going to damage stuff. Things are flogging. So that's another video, really. But in terms of, you might have somebody doing that. You might have somebody they may have just put a reef in. So you need to, the watch leaders will be talking to each other and going, right, we've got a, first reef is in. The reefing line is on this winch. Jammer's open or jammer's closed. We've prepped for a second reef because we've got a squall coming in. So reef 2 line is here. Halyard is ready to go. All the rest of it. Okay, main halyard is on the winch. Weights on the winch. Jammer's open, so you can ease the main halyard. So those sort of discussions, and the crew that are going to take over those jobs need to be talking to each other to make sure they've done a proper handover. It's not just come up, oh hello, what a nice day it is, or what a nice evening it is. That's the sort of thing you need to be discussing. Is there any shipping? We had a ship 2 hours ago, haven't seen anything since. Okay. Or there's a light keeps bobbing over there every now and again and then it disappears. Right, okay, that could be a fisherman, couldn't it? Just coming in, turning, going away. So think about these things and do that in the handover. And then when it's time to hand over, the watches change over, the off watch goes below, and then I would expect the watch leader on the off watch to do a head count to make sure everybody that should be below is below. Okay. The on watch should do a head count to make sure that everybody that should be on deck is on deck. There isn't somebody still lying in their bunk, or there isn't somebody hanging over the side on their harness because they went overboard when everybody was chatting. So just a simple safety thing, especially at night. So 4 on, 4 off, well then you're going to have to try and do that around meal times, aren't you? So your breakfast, say breakfast was 0600 boat time or local time, then it would make sense, wouldn't it, to have lunch at midday, 4 hours later. But then to eat supper at 4 o'clock would not be a great idea, would it? Because you're eating all your food within 8 hours, which might be good if you're into fasting, into that sort of thing. But people probably don't want to eat at 4 o'clock if they've just eaten at 12. Okay, so what you might do is then have a 4 o'clock watch change and then have an 8 o'clock and 8 p.m. 2000 hours watch change with food. The oncoming watch, the watch that's just woken up, would eat, and then once they've eaten and they're prepped and they're clothed, they would go on deck. The off watch comes down, they put their wet gear away, and then they eat, and then they go to bed, might clean the teeth, whatever, and go to bed. Okay, and then you would wake up the next watch, normally, depend on conditions. If it's a warm, balmy night, 24 degrees, and everyone's wearing t-shirts and shorts, they're not going to need long to put their life jacket on and get their knife in the pocket or whatever. If it's 2 degrees and snowing and bad weather, they might need 20 or 30 minutes to get clothed, and then they're going to need probably 10 or 15 minutes to eat. So, and they might need to go to the heads. So they're going to need more time to wake up. You get better and more efficient at this, but just bear in mind, if you've only got 1 or 2 heads on board, it does take time to work through these things, okay? So that's a matter of getting used to what's required. But it does mean that you don't get 4 hours sleep just because you're 4 hours off. And so you might end up only getting maybe 2 hours sleep out of that 4 hours by the time you've got to sleep and by the time you've woken up to get ready again. And it's 4 hours on, 4 hours off is pretty relentless. It also means that 4 hours on, 4 hours off throughout a 24-hour period is an equal number of watches. And there's a downside to that. And the downside is you are always either going to be the watch that sees the sunset, or the watch that always has, the 3 o'clock in the morning watch when it's freezing cold. So that's not great, is it? You're going to have one watch. You might have somebody who's resentful that they never get to see a sunset, or they're always the one that's on deck at 3 in the morning when it's freezing cold. So 4 hours on, 4 hours off has that downside. Okay, so other options. Well, option 2, you might have 2 long watches during the day and then 3 shorter watches during the night. Now, I like this because during the day, whether it's too hot or too cold, you can stand 6 hours. Okay, it might mean that if you have a very cold day and it's snowing and it's really unpleasant, or it's very rough weather, or it's very windy and it's tiring you, that the watch leader might say, right, one of you or 2 of you can go below and rest for half an hour, have a cup of coffee, whatever, down below deck, warm up a bit, and then come up. And so you might have a watch within a watch. Okay, depends again on how many crew you've got. But most people can stand 6 hours. And then at night, when it's maybe colder or more unpleasant or more challenging, it might be bad weather and there's lots of shipping around and it's just hard work. You can't necessarily see the squalls coming in. You can look at your radar and look for them, but it might just be harder work. So in those scenarios, shorter watches is a good idea. So that might be where you have your 4-hour watches. And yeah, if you had 6 on, 6 off during the day, then you'd have 3 4-hour watches during the night. The great thing about that is, during the day on your off watch, you get 6 hours off, which probably means 5 hours sleep. So you get a solid core of sleep. And when it's been bad weather and then you get some calm weather, that off watch allows you to get some sleep back in the bag. Okay. It also means that during the day in 5 or 6 hours on deck, or 6 hours on deck, you've probably got time to do work. So you're on deck for 6 hours, you get into the rhythm, and then you might go, well, let's fix that line, or let's rebuild that particular winch we're not using, or whatever it is. The 4 hours off, 4 hours on, 4 hours off during the evening, being uneven, being 3, means that every 24-hour period, watches do different things. So one day you'll do the 6-hour morning watch, the next day you'll do the 6-hour afternoon watch. One day you'll do 2 4-hour watches during the evening, the next day you'll do 1 4-hour watch during the evening. So again, you get more time to rest, and you split it evenly over both watches. So I really like that sort of system. The other thing really is to think about, because sometimes you might do it the other way around. You might do the short watches during the day and the long watches at night. So that might be in the tropics. In the tropics, when it's almost impossible to sleep below deck during the day, you might prefer to have 6 hours in the cool off watch at night, and then less time below deck during the day, less time on deck during the day, because you're in 36 degrees or 45 or 50 degrees in the sun. So sometimes you might change it so that your watch system is the other way around. Okay, but generally 6 on, 6 off during the day is good. It makes it easy to do that over food as well then, because you have a 0600, say, as your breakfast, and then 6 hours later, so at midday, you'll have your lunch, and 6 hours later at 6 p.m. or 1800 hours, you'll have your supper. So that allows for your watch to eat evenly through a 12-hour period. Okay. Something else which, so option 3, 5 on and 5 off, and each watch shares an hour of their watch. So you have 5 to 5 during the day. Okay, so you've still got a 12-hour segment during the day. The morning watch does 5 hours, the afternoon watch does 5 hours, but for 2 hours, both watches are up. Now that's good. Sometimes you can use that overlap for doing general chores, so things like engine checks, generator checks, making water. If you've got to run the generator while you're making water, you could run it maybe 1 or 2 hours either side of that overlap period, which would mean that it affects your crew's sleep less, because they're up for 2 hours of that 4 hours or whatever. Same with generator charging batteries. If you run it for a 6-hour period, for example, over 2 hours when everyone's up during the middle of the day, it's going to be much less of an impact on people sleeping than it is if you run it at 2 o'clock or all through the night, for example. What do you do with that 2-hour overlap? Well, you might decide to have a crew lunch. Now, you can't all eat lunch together. Someone's got to sail the vessel. But if it's calm weather, you might allow people to eat on deck, and they might all be eating on deck. They might all be eating on deck, and you might just have one person on the helm, or you might put the auto helm on if you've got auto helm, and you might just have one person keeping an eye out for things while everyone else is eating, and then they eat afterwards. It might be that you do your jobs, so perhaps the oncoming watch does their jobs before they come on deck and eats, and then comes on deck, and the other watch go down and eat, and then they might come back on deck, and everyone might have 40 minutes or an hour of time together. Now that's good because it keeps the crew together. If you're a 3 or 4 week trip, then it's not a bad idea for the crew. You can get a bit sick of your watch, but also it's nice to see other people and because you won't necessarily see them other than watch change. Changes the conversation. You can chat about things, catch up on stuff, a bit of social time. But it's also, and this is really important, it's a great opportunity for you to have a positive opportunity to raise issues relating to the boat or the crew or yourself. So there's ways of doing this. We're all adults, so I'll leave you to it. But it shouldn't be a whinge fest. But if you've noticed that whenever you get up, the heads are always dirty, you might mention that to the skipper or to your watch leader who mentions it to the skipper. And then the skipper might say, without being a personal thing, the skipper might say, I've noticed that on a few watch changes, the heads aren't always very clean. So please make sure when you're responsible for cleaning the heads, you do a proper clean. Remind them what a proper clean is. So I'm going to be keeping an eye on this. Please make sure that you all do, when it's your turn, make sure you do a good job. Okay. It might be that one watch is always coming to watch late. Again, try not to make it a them and us thing. But it again might be, I've noticed that watches are not changing on time. In particular, I've noticed a couple of times that one of the watches, don't have to say which one, is late to deck. Now there might be reasons for that. I understand, I don't want to hear the excuses. Please just try harder. Make sure you come to deck on time. Everyone will be happy. It's also an opportunity to tell the crew where you are. How much progress are you making? What weather is expected over the next 24 hours? Why have we not had bread for the last 2 days? If you make bread on board. So it's an opportunity for a general venting of problems, raising of issues, and reminding people. You might say, right, okay, we've been at sea for 2 weeks. We haven't done a man overboard practice for 2 weeks. So I just want everyone to make sure that they know, right, so where's the down buoy? Which one goes over first? Does the light come on automatically when we throw it over? All those sort of things. And just remind people. So it's an opportunity for all those sort of things on the changeover. And people can have a chat, and if somebody has been seasick and they're now back in the fold again, it's a great opportunity to welcome them back, give them a bit of a round of applause. Everyone can have a bit of a laugh about it. Somebody might have their birthday, so it's an opportunity to make a bit of fuss of that person and to make it a memorable birthday for them. So I like that too. So the 2 long watches during the day I really like. The overlap, if you've got the crew to do it, can be really good. Can be a little bit contrived at first, but if you think about what you want to address, don't make it too formal. Let people just find their own way. It works quite well. And then the 4 hours on, 4 hours off during the night again allows it to flip so that each watch does a morning or an evening, or a morning or an afternoon as we go. And then option 4, easy going. So perhaps people make their own food. Perhaps nobody is responsible for being the cook for the day. So, by the way, just on that, if you've got... What I tend to do is I revolve it so that one person is engineer for the day on each watch, one person is cook each day, one person is cleaner each day. That assumes you've got enough crew to do that. That way everybody gets to do all the jobs, everything's fair. Everybody then understands how difficult it is to make food on board if it's bad weather, so you don't get moaning and that sort of thing when it's bad weather and people are finding it difficult to get food on the table. Everybody has to pull their weight. Sometimes somebody might be a rock star sailor and a terrible cook, and it doesn't hurt for that person to be humbled a little bit, and for the person who's a terrible sailor but a rock star cook to contribute something to the vessel. So you should always be looking for how crew can contribute to their team for that particular voyage. Okay. If you are the cook for the day, depending on the size of the vessel, you might be sailing and being cook. But sometimes on bigger vessels, you might just be cook. In which case you get a chance to have a cat nap. You're down below, you might get your iPod on, listening to the tunes, and your only responsibility is to cook and then clean the galley only afterwards and leave it ready for the next day. Get the food out for the next day, etc. Okay. So if you're going to do it that way round, then you can control how much food is being consumed, how much water is being consumed, how much the oven has been used, how much gas you've got left, all that sort of stuff. If you're going to be cooking, if everyone's going to be cooking for themselves, there is more opportunity for people eating too much, not knowing who's eaten and who hasn't eaten. So if somebody's not eating and you're not all eating together, you don't know. And then all of a sudden somebody's poorly because they're not eating for whatever reason. And one of the things on that I've noticed is sometimes somebody might get constipated because they're not drinking enough water, and they get constipated. And then they get worried because they're uncomfortable and they're constipated, and they don't eat because they feel constipated. This can be quite serious, and you don't want that at sea. So you need to know as skipper and as fellow crew, why isn't that person eating? And they will normally, if you get them to one side, will say, I'm a bit constipated. Well, then you can deal with it. You can tell them to rehydrate. You can perhaps give them some laxatives. They'll feel more comfortable and they'll start eating again and be healthy. So you have to think, people are odd. We're all very weird sometimes. And our pride and our what other people think of us is very important. And sometimes people can live with things they shouldn't live with and put themselves through really potentially quite dangerous things just because they're embarrassed. Okay, I have stories on this. I'm not going to share them in this video. But if it is going to be an easygoing thing, then just be aware that you don't have the same level of control and management over resources and over crew. So you can't manage your crew so well, you can't look after them so well, you can't monitor them so well. You can't has the gas ring been run 6 times because each crew member on that watch has cooked their food on that gas ring? Are you going to run out of gas on that basis? Or did everybody put it in one pot and eat together and run the gas ring for a 1/6 of that period of time, or a 1/3 of that period of time? So I think it's a good idea for everybody to eat together. It's good for morale, and it's good for maintaining and managing resources. It also means that you haven't constantly got a galley which is busy. But if you're some race boats, a small crew, some of them they're all very experienced crew. They're very dedicated to what they're doing, and all they need to do is come down, boil a kettle, throw it in some, rehydrate some food, wolf it down, and then go to bed in their dry suit. Fine. They know what they're doing. That's the way they're going to do it. If you're running a leisure, a vessel on what should be an enjoyable passage, or a larger crew, then you have the ability to be more scheduled with everything and have more control. And on that subject, it's generally considered very bad form to go below when you're not eating and when it's not mealtime, and to pick at the fridge or at other food. You're basically eating somebody else's supper. So you could have a snack bag, and it might be allowed that everybody gets, you open a packet of biscuits in the afternoon, everybody gets a couple of biscuits, and you might be a bit, you don't have to be too controlled on this. You might say, look, anybody, I really fancy a chocolate biscuit with a cup of tea. Anybody else? Yeah, okay, go and get them. So that's fine, but don't eat food out of the meal plans because you will cause huge problems. Okay. What else have we got here? Right, so a few things really to think about. I mean, basically, at the beginning of any voyage, if you've got bad weather or the first night, it's likely people are, first of all, not going to be tired and want to go to bed. So when they go off, I would let people sail for a while before you put them into off watch generally, so that they are thinking, actually, I wouldn't mind a couple of hours. I normally do it after the first evening meal. And then let them go off. Now, the problem with this is that if it's a little bit lumpy, or if people aren't used to it, or they're susceptible to seasickness, just remind them not to have too big an evening meal first time, because if they've been out all day in the open fresh air and they eat, I don't know, chili con carne, and they're a bit stuffed, and then they go below and take all the kit off, and they're new on the boat, they're not used to it, it's quite hard work, the boat's heeled over, they're getting a little bit warm, and they get into their bunk, and then, oh dear, I'm feeling a bit stuffed now. And before you know it, especially if the weather gets worse, or when they get up to get on deck 4 hours later, or 6 hours later, or whenever it is, probably 4 hours later if it's an evening, they're going to be getting up at night, a little bit blurry-headed, still a bit full from supper, overheating perhaps, staggering around, not used to it. It's all new because, they're not used to the watch changes heeled over at 30 degrees, and you'll probably get people coming down with seasickness. So first night at sea, eat light, go to bed after your first night, 4 hours off, and then swap, and then the next watch off, they've had 4 hours for their food to go down, they've been up for maybe 10 or 12 hours already, they're quite tired, they should sleep quite well. The other watchers had some fresh air, and then when they do the watch change, you should slowly then get into your watch change, okay? But the first night, especially at the first off watch at night after a meal, especially if it's rough, expect you might lose some people with seasickness. And how you manage that, how you make sure that people clean up after themselves, have you got sick bags ready, have you got buckets ready just in case? You don't need to emphasize it, but you need to have them ready and let people know at the beginning before you leave where they are, okay? As I say, I think eating as a group is good for building a cohesive team. We are tribal, social animals, and eating as a group is ancient. So I think it's not a bad idea to eat as a group. Okay. Snacking and eating I've addressed. Roll call. So I did address roll call. So make sure that when you're off watch, everyone is off watch with a roll call. When you're on watch and the other off watch has gone below deck, do a roll call to make sure everyone's on deck. Those are only 3 watch systems: the 4 on, 4 off, the 6 on, 6 off, and then 4 hours on off during the night, and 5 on, 5 off with a 2-hour overlap, plus 4 hours off at night. So those are only 3 watch systems. There's plenty of other things you can imagine and work through, but those are 3 tried and tested. I've done all of those, and they all work to some extent. You might do, if you've got a large vessel, you might do a 3 watch system, and that does enable for more rest. For the off watch, you might have one off watch which sleeps for a longer period of time, and you might have one skeleton crew on deck and another standby watch doing jobs, cooking food, and then ready to come to deck if you need to put a reef in or something like that. Some people like that. I've never really tried it myself. Some people swear by it. It can cause problems with people having to just find a bunk to sleep in and move from bunk to bunk, and they don't have their own spot where they're maybe hot bunking with one other person. That, a lot of people like to have their own little base where they can have their stuff, their book or their whatever it is, the battery charger for their phone or whatever, in a pocket by their bunk, or a little dry bag with their deck kit in it, the lamp and the woolly hat and all that sort of stuff. And if you've got to move that around all the time, or your sleeping bag and everything else, it can be a bit of a pain. So some people don't like that. And the three watch system can be a problem for that. But it does have benefits of a better sleep and having a larger standby watch available for when things go wrong. Okay, I think really that's pretty much it. Just looking here at what my conclusions. I mean, yeah, the most important thing here, generally, unless you're doing this for a living and you've just got to get a boat somewhere, you want to enjoy the process. Sailing is supposed to be fun. So make sure that whatever watch system you put in place, it's fun for everyone, that everyone is rested. I don't know if you can hear that noise. That's my recycling being collected, so sorry about that. But make sure everyone's rested. Make sure everybody is getting to enough sailing. You want to go sailing, so make sure they're sailing. Make sure everyone shares their chores. Everyone pulls their weight. That's really important. And as a skipper, that's your responsibility to make sure you call people out. If somebody is slacking, you're the boss. You need to address it. If you don't address it, over time, everyone will resent you because you haven't called it out. Now, you can call it out nicely, but you have to be strong on that. The boat needs to be safe, so people need to be not tired or cold or in other ways seasick or in some way not functioning. And you need to split skills so that the skills are equal on both sides of the watch, so that you haven't got to keep waking up the one engineer you have on board to help fix the generator when the generator stops during battery charging. Okay, so if you can't, and that comes down to planning as part of your passage planning. So your crew management and your watch systems and your crew selection is core to your passage plan. And the longer the passage or the bigger the voyage, the more important that is. Your crew are critical. Shorter passage, smaller boat, not so much. But it is important to think about crew management, scheduling, watches, standing orders, what to expect, what the crew need to expect from your standing orders, what's expected from them, what you expect from them, what they expect from you, and then stick to all of your implied or specific commitments. Okay, so that's watch systems. 3 or 4 different types of watch system there. Hope that sets out pros and cons. Hope that's useful to you. And longer video than normal. I hope I haven't bored you too much to death. And I'll see you again soon. Cheers. I hope you found this short video tutorial useful. If you did, please click the like button. This helps promote the video on YouTube. If you've got any of your own tips or experience you'd like to share, or you've got an idea for a video, let me know in the comments section below. And if you aren't already a subscriber, consider subscribing and remember to click the little bell so you are notified when I release my next video. There are various links that might interest you in the description section under this video. Until next time, sail safe.